but glad to have everybody here. Pradeep, if you would be so kind as to do the land acknowledgement.
Sure, Richard. We also wanted to start this meeting with our Indigenous land acknowledgement, which is now available on our website. Specifically, the DFW areas, we are standing and living on the land stolen from Kickapoo, Wichita, Tawakani, Humanos, and Comanche people who have been harmed, yet continue to thrive in the process of colonization and white supremacy. I encourage all of us to go to native-land.ca and educate ourselves on these native communities.
Thank you, Pradeep. Simon, would you discuss our ground rules, please?
Absolutely. At our meetings, we ask everybody to follow the following guide rules. Excuse me, still early. Make space or take space. Please limit your comments to 2 minutes each so everybody has time to speak. When you do speak from the I perspective instead of generalizing. Practice active listening and seek to understand the point of view of the person you're engaging in dialogue with. Assume good intentions. Respect one another's space, time, and interest. Be willing to be uncomfortable. Be open to productive discomfort. Intent does not negate impact. It's very important to remember that. Disagree without discord. Personal attacks and labeling have no place in our chapter, and accept that there is no quick fix for the issues we discuss.
Thank you, Simon. And while Simon was mentioning those ground rules, I did put our agenda in the chat, so you'll see the agenda there if you haven't seen it yet. So the next thing we'll do is we do have people drifting in. Welcome, Haley's iPhone. And,
hello.
Hi. And Beth, if you wouldn't mind, you have a contemplation for us.
I do. Actually, the Earth has a contemplation for us. Today's focus is the equinox, which is coming up. It's usually the 21st, but I believe it's the 20th this year. And all creatures are affected by the seasonal change. And the only difference between most other living beings and us is that they know how it affects them. In our Earth disconnection, we sometimes lose that. So we're just going to take a moment to contemplate it and be present with it. The Earth in her wisdom brings us 2 seasons of extremes. The most light and the most dark, and sandwiched in between are seasons of balance. Equinox, equal night, balance, the equal amount of dark and light, the equal amount of yin and yang, the equal amount of thought and action, cause and effect, the feminine dynamic and the masculine dynamic. And so in today's contemplation, we get to ask ourselves, where is the balance in our own lives today and in this season? And where is there imbalance in our lives? And where can we bring balance to it? I will end the thought by saying that one of my wise teachers once said, take your action out of love and peace will be the effect. And so she also taught us that love and peace are part of this balancing dynamic of life. And so we welcome consciously and with our hearts the season of spring, and thank the Earth for giving us these wisdom teachings. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Good. Well, I think I've said hello to everybody. Patricia, welcome. I didn't notice you before. Welcome. Good to have you. And I think we're just about ready to get into the introduction of the speakers. Both of our speakers are from the Sierra Club today. Bekah Hinojosa is an artist and organizer from the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, serving as the Sierra Club Gulf Coast campaign representative. She works with communities along the Texas coastline to stop oil and gas exports that would harm communities of color. She is inspired by building art with people of all ages. Welcome, Bekah. Our other speaker from the Sierra Club is Zach Kopkin. He's an organizer with the Sierra Club with roots in the Atlanta area and Appalachia. He moved to the Gulf South 2 years ago and resides in Bulbancha, colonized as New Orleans. As a guitarist and songwriter, he believes that telling stories, celebrating culture, and building community are essential to achieving justice in the present and future. He looks forward to talking to us about how we can act in solidarity with each other from Dallas to the Gulf Coast. So welcome, Bekah and Zach. You have the floor and it's all yours. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Richard. I'm gonna share my screen. Oh, it actually says it's disabled. Do I need to
Okay,
give the slides to someone else or get the
let me see
permission?
what I need to do here. I'm going to make you the host because that seems to be the easiest thing.
Okay, that sounds good. It's still recording, so that's good. I can pass that hosting thing back whenever you may need me to. I'll just run the slides and say thanks to Richard. Richard's been involved with the Sierra Club working on liquefied natural gas. One big part of how Richard got involved in that conversation was through climate reality projects. I'm not sure if y'all call it a summit or a conference, but in Houston this past year, where a lot of the conversation was about liquefied natural gas on the Gulf Coast and how we can tell our stories in a way that can make a difference there. So one big thing we do want to talk about today that Bekah is really like at the forefront of this work in the Gulf Coast and around the world actually is finance campaigning to stop liquefied natural gas and other fossil fuel from impacting our communities and our coastline. So we're here today because allies in Texas urban areas like y'all can bring attention to the financial institutions based in their cities that are funding environmental and climate injustice. For example, Chase and Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase specifically. I think that's probably pretty clear, but I don't know, maybe there's some other bank called Chase because I hear people internally call it JP Morgan all the time. But those two banks have major office towers in Dallas and they're two of the worst offenders. Together, they're putting almost $11 billion into 14 different liquefied natural gas export projects on the Gulf Coast. So being able to work together across our geographies and make those institutions accountable to our communities is really important. And financial strategy is solidarity organizing every time. So that's what we're looking forward to talking to y'all about. I'll pass it. Oh, hold on. I'll cover the table of contents, then pass it to Bekah. So Bekah's gonna be doing most of the speaking, and she has some life connections to your area as well. So I think that's a pretty cool thing to share with y'all, and to have lived and know some of the same places in history that y'all do. I'll introduce myself some more, talk about our vision and values, the moment that we're in with the LNG build out and fossil fuel finance, and then the solutions that we are really committed to, particularly focusing on key banks, creating pressure through inside outside strategy. So that means, having relationships and meetings with the leaders of those institutions internally, but also putting outside pressure on them, affecting their reputation, and then taking solidarity actions where those financial institutions operate. And we have a few different things that y'all can do today, and things that we can preview coming up forward with Earth Day and future solidarity actions that we might take together. So I'll pass it to you, Bekah.
Hey y'all, good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Bekah Hinojosa. My pronouns are she, her. I live in Brownsville, Texas. I actually went to college at the University of North Texas, so go UNT. I lived in Denton for 4 years. I graduated in 2014, and I was a part of the anti-fracking Denton fracking ban movement when I was in school, and was very familiar with all of the fracking and the Barnett Shale. I went to like a city meeting in Arlington where they were discussing, the setbacks and ordinances with oil and gas drilling. Was also at Zach mentioned in a previous slide, like there are a ton of corporate offices in Dallas, in the DFW area. Well, back in the 2010s, I was part of a protest outside of a fracking corporation office called Range Resources, which got a lot of national media attention because, at the time, anti-fracking protests were becoming a new thing in Texas. And in particular, having people gather outside of corporate headquarters in Texas was a really big deal. So I've seen firsthand and been a part of actions firsthand in the DFW area, and I know the kind of spirit, the strong spirit y'all have. So it's really great to be able to chat with you. But I moved back home in 2016, and for the last, 8 years, even before 2016, I've been a part of an anti-LNG movement. And as you all know, LNG is part of the cycle of fracking. So first there's extraction in places like the Barnett Shale, West Texas's Permian Basin, the Eagle Ford Shale. So there's fracking, and then companies plan to build new pipelines. Like for example, in Brownsville, there are plans to build what is called the Rio Bravo pipeline to take fracked gas all the way to the coastline in Brownsville near South Padre Island. And that's what, a big part of what we're fighting down here in Brownsville is those pipelines and these gas plants that would liquefy the gas and export it overseas. So I mentioned that the community I'm from, we've been fighting for over 8 years. We were originally started off fighting 5 LNG terminals, and now we're down to 2. So a big shout out to years and years of community mobilization, scaring off these LNG corporations. But now we're at a very pivotal point in our fight where, we are just yelling at all of the bad actors involved with these 2 LNG projects, because they are very close to trying to move forward and trying to begin construction. So, here's some photos of, if you've never been to the Port Isabel, Laguna Madre area, which I think many of you maybe have, because we're all Texans here. This is what our coastline looks like. It's wetlands, it's pristine wildlife refuge, like the Laguna Atascosa Wildlife Refuge. Our ship channel doesn't look like the Houston or Corpus ship channel. we're the little piece of the Texas coast that, you know, is still largely unindustrialized by the fossil fuel industry. And roughly like 3/4 of the Texas coastline is, you know, full of refineries, smokestacks, you know, petrochemical industry. And so our little piece in the south, you know, doesn't have that. And these 2 LNG projects are the first big wave of that industry trying to come into our area that I said is like pristine habitat, that is home to low-income Latinx communities, indigenous communities, where there are actually sacred sites and sacred lands that belong to the Carizo-Comacrudo tribe of Texas. And where people are very passionate in protecting these lands. So here's a photo of some community members in Brownsville holding up signs during our big Chato Days parade. And, you know, here are community members that regularly go out and travel and visit our wetland ecosystems. There's a family there. And, you know, what our local economy does depend on is access to these pristine waterways, these wetlands, so that their industries can thrive, like shrimping and fishing. And here's a photo of a shrimper. So that's a little bit about what I'm about, and the local fight that I'm involved with very passionate RGV community members. But I will pass it back to Zach to talk about vision and values.
Awesome. Thanks, Bekah. Yeah, so I mean, I think you can hear a lot of these elements in what Bekah just had to say from her own community, but really across the whole Gulf Coast, and what we and clearly y'all too stand for is a world where sacrifice zones no longer exist. A lot of communities have been treated as disposable. Low income and communities of color, indigenous communities have been treated like, often in the conversation, they don't even exist when we talk about industry. They're just in the way or non-existent. And so we envision a world where everyone has dignity, everyone has self-determination, and we can't even imagine throwing people in places away for a wealthy few to make unbelievable amounts of profit. And so to do that, we understand it's only possible to create that kind of world when Black and Indigenous communities are at the forefront. And we have some, I think, really special art that captures some of these ideas visually. So like we said when we started, Bekah and I are both artists. I do not make visual things like this. Bekah's a really talented visual artist. But this work here is from, can you remember her name, Bekah, off the top of your head? An artist in the Houston area.
I know her first name is Sarah. I can look up her name.
That's right. Yeah, she's got a really great Instagram page. You can get t-shirts and different things with this logo on it. But this just represents, what we love about the places that we are from and call home. I feel like it says a lot of sort of the contemplation earlier today too, just this balance between people and the world around us. And a couple other works of art recently that I think do a really great job capturing that set of vision and values. Over here, this is artwork made in Louisiana to help promote the Week of Action that we have coming up this week, which is been organized by Gulf South for a Green New Deal. So Sierra Club's involved in that formation. And I just love the way that it both shows, it doesn't ignore the problems, but shows that we actually already have the solutions. It's the people and the ways of life that people have practiced since before we can even remember. And those memories are crucial for us being able to thrive again. And then over here, we have a podcast that Courtney Knockin, who is from Beaumont and now lives in New Orleans and works on our team at the Sierra Club, is the narrator of, and they've been interviewing people across the Permian Basin and Texas and Louisiana about that fracking cycle that Bekah just mentioned. And so I hope that these images are inspiring to you and things that you'd like to share, and are just another way of capturing what we're all about and the world that we envision together. I would definitely love to hear when we get to the end of the presentation, just kind of what feelings these images bring up for you, the stories that Bekah's telling, that I'll be telling, what it makes you want to do, and what it makes you feel is possible. I think that's really important to be able to reflect back on, our own memories and experiences, and how we can apply those to inspire others to join this movement with us. I'll pass it back though to Bekah to get more into the specifics of the LNG fight.
Thank you, Zach. One of those art pieces that says break the cycle is from an artist that lives in the border, who's very active in the LNG fight. Her name's Nancy Guevara. She's putting together a really cool exhibit, exciting exhibit about colonization that really touches on SpaceX, and her exhibit opens April 1st. So last night I was helping her paint walls, and I saw the image right now and I got really excited. And the other artist on the other page is Sarah Welch from Louisiana. But thanks, Zach. You can take it back to the other slide. And
Sure, yeah, and I didn't mention too the artist on the left. Her name's Josie Ignatois, and she's an environmental activist in the New Orleans area. So all local.
Great. So I touched on this already in my welcome speech, but the top photo is what the Rio Grande Valley looks like now. I mentioned that we're a small piece of the coastline that doesn't have fossil fuel industry. That we're a community where people have actually fled the fossil fuel industry. I've heard a number of stories from local people. There's a family who survived the BP explosion in Texas City, and they actually moved down to the Port Isabel area because they didn't want to live near explosive industry anymore. There's a gentleman on South Padre Island City Council who used to live in Quintana Island, which is near Freeport, but he was pushed out when Freeport LNG took over that island and set up shop. And so, we hear stories of people also from northern Mexico who were tired of living near maquiladoras, who moved into the Brownsville area because their kids have asthma and they wanted to live somewhere where the air quality was a little bit better. So we're kind of already experiencing that in a way, folks fleeing the industry, having to flee climate change, people becoming climate change refugees, and going into areas where, these are remaining pieces that don't have fossil fuel industry. And the fossil fuel industry, unfortunately, has discovered these areas and is now trying to move in as part of their next big build out. So at the top is a photo of, pristine habitat near the Laguna Atascosa Wildlife Refuge. That's part of an international wildlife corridor that's important for species like the ocelot. That, these clean waterways are important for low-income community members to go and fish to feed their families. Every time I go out to one of the proposed LNG sites, I see people fishing, regular Latinx, brown folks that are out there, just throwing nets and fishing to go sell that fish or to go home and cook it. And they have no idea that this is one of the proposed sites of an LNG terminal, of Rio Grande LNG. And as we know, when the industry moves in, they contaminate waterways, or they use their, security zones to push people out. So I don't think that people will be able to fish there anymore if one of these LNG projects, Rio Grande LNG, is successful in building their facility. And if y'all aren't familiar with what an LNG facility looks like, here's that photo on the bottom of what our region would look like if these two projects, Rio Grande LNG and Texas LNG, were to try to build. It's storage tanks, sometimes 15 stories tall. It's LNG tanker ships that are 3 football fields tall. Long, I'm sorry. It's flare stacks, ground flare systems. It's a series and networks of new pipelines that have explosion risks and explosion safety hazards. These facilities altogether would span almost 2,000 acres, which is, larger than the city of South Padre Island. These storage tanks I mentioned, 15, sometimes up to 20 stories tall. That's 3 times the height of the Port Isabel Lighthouse. So just to kind of explain the size and scale of what our community is facing, what we don't currently have any kind of that industry, and that would completely come in and almost pretty much take over with their hulking presence and completely change our way of life. So there's a lot at stake. And because of this, there's tremendous local community opposition. So South Padre Island, Port Isabel, Laguna Vista, Laguna Heights, all of these communities are anti-LNG. They've passed resolutions against these projects. They've been speaking up and taking action in every part of the regulatory process. But as we know, the federal regulatory agencies, the state agencies, have act like rubber stamps. They often just approve anything for the fossil fuel industry. And because of that, community members in the RGV have been going above and beyond to yell at any bad corporation or bank involved with these projects. So we've been working internationally with organizations in Australia and France, because there's a French banks and an Australian bank involved with these projects. And because sometimes in these European countries, they're a lot smaller and they have a little bit more awareness of the hazards of fracking. And because they have years and years of sustained momentum, pressuring these banks and their European governments, that we've had some success. So, at the bottom, there's a photo of people in the RGV. They're on a boat. It says BNP Paribas, stop banking on Texas LNG. That's a French bank, BNP Paribas. We, through campaigning, through petitioning, through meeting with this bank, we successfully got this bank to withdraw from one of the LNG projects in the valley. So sometimes, long sustained bank divestment work, campaigning, yelling at banks, working together with communities to oppose these banks, we have victories. And it's partially because of BNP Paribas withdrawing that the Texas LNG project has been stalled for a while. They haven't canceled, but they have been facing significant setbacks. The other project we've been pressuring is called Rio Grande LNG, and it's another French bank involved called Société Générale. So you see their logo. The other Australian bank is Macquarie. There's a photo that says Macquarie, stop banking on Rio Grande LNG and the Rio Bravo pipeline. So we've been actively pressuring those banks for years. The trouble is that Brownsville, we don't have corporate offices, we don't have regulatory agencies. So we find ourselves having to travel a lot just to pressure these corporations or these regulatory officials. And so we're always looking for ways to connect with other communities that are impacted by these same projects, or that are impacted by these same banks, and kind of build solidarity and work together on our issues to pressure these banks. So we partnered with Aboriginal Indigenous people in Australia to pressure Macquarie. We've been also trying to partner with other groups to pressure Société Générale. And we're also actively pressuring US banks to withdraw from these projects. And there are US bank branch offices all over the country. So here's an example of some more banner drops and actions and petitions that we've done internationally and also in the US and in Texas. So here's an example called Break the Fracking Cycle, where there was a week of action and each day a different community took action at a different target. So you can see the Woodlands is on there. There were some folks that did a banner drop outside one of the LNG company offices in the Woodlands. You see San Antonio on there. There were folks that called attention to fracking and, you know, how fracking, these LNG projects would increase fracking where they live in the Eagle Ford Shale. There's some folks in New York City that did a banner drop outside of the Office of Societe Generale, the French bank I mentioned, folks in Paris that did an action, people in Bonn that held banners outside of a UN climate change conference. And then here we have Ireland. At one point, Ireland was planning to import gas from the LNG facilities in Brownsville. And through international collaboration with folks in Ireland, we actually were able to stop that contract. So we successfully stopped Cork LNG that would have taken in gas in Ireland. So another major victory, an example of when we work internationally, when we have solidarity with each other, when we highlight the different, you know, ways that communities are impacted by build outs or by extraction, you know, we can have some victories and we can learn a lot from each other. So I'll pause there and give it back to Zach.
So thanks, Bekah. So this is getting into towards the end of our presentation. We have information for you to learn more. Bekah can tell you more about the RGV report that lays out the financial case against these frack gas export terminals, the greenwashing that's going on around LNG, indigenous rights violations, ecological damage, and other things. So I won't say more about that because Bekah is the expert there and helped produce that report, and it's been updated multiple times. But over here, we've got what we're calling the LNG export tracker. So this link, I'll put it in the chat for y'all. But you can see where different LNG export facilities are across the Gulf Coast. Actually, the majority are in Louisiana, but nearly as many in Texas as well. And that ranges from Port Arthur to Freeport, Corpus, and then on down to the Rio Grande Valley in Brownsville. And so in here, you can take a look at who are the different funders of each specific LNG facility, how much. That's where I got that statistic earlier that Chase and Bank of America are funding 14 different LNG facilities. Our analyst team's been able to do that research and compile it. You can also see what phase each of these is at in terms of permitting and funding, who they're selling the gas to, because there also has to be buyers, like Bekah mentioned, you know, and sometimes they have to build new facilities like they would in Ireland. So that's another way that we can stop these projects from going through on our own coastline. Those are a couple ways that you can learn more. There's also environmental justice data and things like that in this LNG tracker as well. Did you want to say anything more about the RGV report, Bekah?
You know, please share this report with bank officials if you come across bank officials or political officials, or, you know, share it amongst yourselves. It's information about why LNG exports are absolutely terrible and must be stopped. And in particular, the fight against LNG in the Rio Grande Valley and, you know, what's at stake. And I mentioned these two projects, Rio Grande LNG and Texas LNG, are very close to moving forward. So right now we're, you know, doing everything we can to try to stop them from being built. And that includes meeting with banks and hosting bank protests, and also sending petitions to these banks.
Cool. Well, speaking of, we have ways that you can take action around these banks. So I'm going to drop the links to these as well. But Bekah, if you want to talk about the RGV petitions, who they're targeting and why. I can also
Sure.
open the link so you can see what it looks like.
Yeah, we have 2 petitions. So one is to the big 6 banks. So the big 6 are Wells Fargo, Chase, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Citibank, and I think Morgan Stanley. Is that 6 banks? I think so. We've been actively meeting with these banks. We've been delivering these petitions when we meet with them. So sometimes we sign petitions and we're like, where did my signature go? Well, I can tell you for a fact that I will print these out. I have been printing these out. We've been delivering them to these bank officials or delivering them to their corporate offices. So please sign. We also send email updates to people that sign these petitions. So they go a long way. We've been able to get 2 of the 6 banks to commit to staying away from these projects. And then our other petition is to banks that are currently involved. So the first one is banks telling them to stay away. Oh, sorry, I think you have to go back to the slide.
Okay. Here we go.
Yeah, so this is urging banks that are involved with these projects to immediately pull out. And those are Macquarie, an Australian bank, Societe Generale, a French bank, and Credit Suisse, a Swiss bank. So we've been actively meeting with Credit Suisse. We've delivered the petitions to Credit Suisse. Every time we sign this petition, it goes to one of these corporate officials' email inboxes. We've been also trying to get additional meetings with Societe Generale and Macquarie. So these petitions are very important and encourage you all to sign. Anyone in the world can sign these petitions. Please consider signing them and sharing them with your friends and family members to also sign.
Cool. Yeah. And then there's another one. We haven't talked as much about Port Arthur today, but there's also one, oops, my bad, focused on Port Arthur LNG, which is in Southeast Texas, and JP Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs are 2 of the biggest funders of Port Arthur liquefied natural gas. And the strategy is similar in that location as well. And really they've learned and taken a lot from the success that the community has found in the RGV. And then Richard is actually one of the leaders of this space, the Break the Cycle online community. So if you want to be a part of this conversation on an ongoing basis, maybe Richard can drop the chat or I can try to type it real quick.
I'll do it.
There we go.
Okay, you got it.
Yeah, it's not hyperlinked though. I guess I need to add the www part or something. But we use Reddit, which is a social media platform. It's a network of discussion forums. And we've been having a lot of success spreading the word about the work that we're doing and helping engage people in conversations about the world they want to live in and how we can create that together. So that's been really exciting. We've doubled and tripled the size of that community each week for the first 2 weeks. So it's really very new. But we've been able to reach thousands of people with our message that way. And it'll only grow the more that we engage with it. A couple other things that we have coming up that we can talk about, and I'll give you my contact information too, so you can let me know about your interest in these opportunities. But there's a big Southwest Louisiana Earth Day mobilization happening on actual Earth Day, April 22nd. We'll be bringing people together from across Texas and Louisiana. So if any of y'all want to be there, I know that you'll have your own Earth Day things that you're gonna be talking about later, but some of y'all would like to show up and meet Gulf Coast leaders, then that's a great way to do that. And also, I've taught Richard and other folks how to use our peer-to-peer texting tool. So that's a way that you can remotely be a big support to let people know about this opportunity and help them get there. And then finally, we would just love to know personally, let's see where I wrote this down. Yeah, we'll be thinking about solidarity actions like Bekah just talked about. We've worked with folks in San Antonio and other places. Y'all could be a group just like that. And so we don't have like an ask for you specifically or an event planned right this second, but what would be really helpful would be to know what you as a chapter of Climate Reality Project would be interested in doing, if that sounds like something that you'd like to continue talking about. And if so, how we can communicate with you all about that. Because it'll just take some time and some relationship building. But I think we can do really powerful things, both in the immediate term with this petition and joining the online community, but also longer term. So we'll stop there and would love to take your questions and see how we can continue to collaborate.
Good. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, y'all, for that excellent presentation. We really appreciate it, and it was a high quality one. I wanted to ask about the dilemma that's come to us in the climate movement generally, and the environmental movement, and the human rights and solidarity movements that's posed by the unique, geopolitical and technological fissures that have arisen in the last, become especially visible since the Russia invasion of Ukraine. How do you handle questions about that? Do the petitions and other actions, routinely propose positive visions and actions in favor of renewable energy as opposed to fossil fuels? In other words, how do you respond to the problem that, the invasion and related pressures have opened up a new space for the oil and gas industry that nevertheless has saved some lives to the extent that it has allowed, in addition to the warmer winter in Europe, for example, some relief on the energy needs that would otherwise be threatened by the Russian cutoff of oil to Europe. In other words, if we look at the system, how do you handle the dilemma posed by the need to stop fossil fuel production in order to meet the Paris goals or quicker goals, while at the same time, looking at the system and saving lives, stopping the sort of, aggressive genocidal, in my opinion, actions that are taken by autocratic states?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and one I get asked a lot. We have a section in our report that touches on, what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. So please check that out. But something I always bring up is that it takes 5 years or so to even attempt to break ground and for a company to try to break ground and build an LNG facility. So when they talk about, the industry talks about build all these LNG facilities now as a solution, well, that's going to take years and years and years. It's not a solution. It's a waste of our time, resources. It sacrifices communities when we could be using those time and resources instead in investing in an alternative and building up alternative renewable energy. There's a really amazing activist from the Ukraine that you all should check out on social media. I had the pleasure of meeting her briefly a few weeks ago when she actually came to Houston. Her name is Svetlana Romanko, and she's a Ukrainian woman, lives in Ukraine. She's the one actively speaking out against, this war, the oil and gas companies using this war to further their initiatives.
If you could put her information in the chat as well. I'm unfamiliar with her, but I think that's right. I think the lock-in, it's a real risk of, and it's unfortunately it's part of the Inflation Reduction Act as well. And I think we're going to touch briefly, at least, on the Willow project, but I think that's one dilemma. And, it's to be avoided, while at the same time alleviating present need with present resources, with stopping certainly new destruction, new facilities, new emissions that are going to make the climate crisis and its associated human rights violations worse. Good answer. Thank you, Bekah.
Yeah, I would add, Chip, I think you're both right on point that I work more with folks in Southwest Louisiana. I'm in Louisiana myself, and one of their big rallying cries has been the phrase "enough is enough." There's a lot of people who work in industry. Lots of people work in industry or fields that are related to industry or depend on it at this point in time in that area. But you ask folks, do we need more? And usually they'll agree we don't need more. So it's an easier point to start at, to say, okay, well, we're not trying to take anything away from you right now, but if we're going to be able to transition, knowing that we have to transition, we cannot be building more things. And then along the financial lines, there's major risks in terms of climate, building all these things that have to be on the coast because they're for export, and making that case to the banks that they're actually taking an enormous financial risk too, and ending up with facilities that are stranded or underwater, or just don't serve a purpose anymore, and they've sunk a lot of money into it. And then the communities are the ones left with all this infrastructure that's often leaking, creating Superfund sites that we know don't always get cleaned up. So you can't just go back to that what the RGV looks like now if we build, even if those facilities aren't actually operating.
Great points, because I think what we're doing in other spheres is changing the demand environment, even in the short to medium term. So there's a business question as to whether these facilities will make sense as well. Thank you for all your work, you guys.
Any other questions for our guest speakers today? Just pipe in or raise your digital hand, or however you want to. Okay, we've got a couple of questions. Haley, please go.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much to both of you for putting together this presentation. First of all, it was super insightful, and I really enjoyed learning about it. So Zach, Bekah, you guys are phenomenal. I grew up in El Paso, so shout out to local Rio Grande buddies. But I wanted to ask, what factors have recently changed or emerged that made Brownsville, Texas, an attractive location for LNG to emerge in?
I think it's just that our ship channel just has room. The Houston ship channel and the Corpus Christi ship channel are overly clogged with fossil fuel industry. That's not stopping the fossil fuel industry there from still building out and proposing expansions and more fossil fuel industry. But I think the reason why the LNG companies are trying to come down to Brownsville is because we have a 17-mile long ship channel that doesn't have industry. And because our port commissioners have been selling us out and, leasing land at just dirt cheap prices to try to bring the fossil fuel industry in. It's absolutely terrible. So, that's what I've seen.
You probably already mentioned this, but how long when did they first propose that they were looking to buy a lease, or they've already bought the lease, they're already on their way in?
So these two projects are leasing land with the Port of Brownsville. So they already have those leases for a number of years. They first proposed these projects back in 2014 and 2015. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
Jan, please ask your question.
Hey there. Thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering what are your thoughts on this proposal by the right-wing Texas legislators to harm the banks or to legislate that you cannot disinvest from fossil fuel interest? They're trying to put that into law. How are we going to address that? Or does anybody know more about it? I don't know a whole lot about it, but it sounds alarming.
Yeah, this seems to be what the Texas Ledge does every ledge cycle, is they like figure out where, you know, activists are pushing and then they try to pass a law, right? We saw with like the fracking ban, where communities in Texas were trying to like regulate oil and gas or ban fracking, and then Texas Ledge comes out with a ban to ban fracking bans. So now we see them doing the same thing, where Texas is trying to stop, companies from divesting from, or banks trying to stop banks from divesting from projects and companies. So we do have bank divestment organizers that are tracking what's going on, not just in Texas, but other states are trying to fight divestment. So that's an excellent question of like, you know, what can we be doing in Texas to push back on that? I think that's something we're definitely thinking about and strategizing around. I don't know if you have any other thoughts about that, Zach.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I would definitely refer you to the Lone Star chapter of the Sierra Club too, which is the Texas chapter. But I think maybe at one point it had encompassed, I don't know, Sierra Club chapters change and the names are confusing sometimes. But that means Texas in our parlance. And so they do all the work at the legislature at the state level. And I know that one of the arguments I've heard around, you know, why a ban like this is inappropriate, that actually kind of speaks in market sort of terms, is that climate risk is a real financial risk. And so people investing in a bank or putting their money in a bank should know what the climate risks are, and the bank should have the freedom to make choices based on climate risk. So it's just bad business, besides the fact that it seems anti-free speech and all of that too, but it's really anti-consumer.
If I can quickly add, it's just part of a growing irrationality that, you know, right now, everything like environmental social governments, corporate responsibility, DEI, education, including ethnic studies that correct the imbalance of the lack of ethnic studies, they're all part of this cultural war that is an alternative to real governance and good governance. So it's part of that, and it must be resisted very strongly, because as Zach says, it's insane. I mean, they're blaming the SVB crash, you know, on its diversity policies, which is it's utter nonsense. Good risk management in these institutions for decades have taken climate risk into account, and they must continue to do so.
Are any of our groups, our group, your group, Sierra Club, lobbying the state legislators? Should we be, you know, organizing a drive to contact them as if that would do any good? I don't know what else to do.
I can respond to that. So another group, the Citizens Climate Lobby, which has been around for many years, they organize a Texas Legislative Days. That's next Monday and Tuesday. The applications are closed, but I am going down there to lobby with other environmental activists at the state capitol for 2 days. So a big thing will be about the electrical infrastructure, but I'm sure we'll be talking about some other points as well. So that's just one activity going on. I know the Sierra Club has had a number of fora recently about legislative issues in Texas, which are all very challenging. Okay, one last question for Zach and Bekah before we move on. Anybody's hand up? Good. Well, thank you so much, Zach and Bekah. Very powerful and convincing presentation. We'll put that on our website where the many members that couldn't be here today can view the recording. And to respond to at least one of your questions, we will support you. It's largely maybe online at this point. We'll need more moderators for the Reddit at some point, perhaps, and contribute to these petitions, but we may also be able to contribute our physical presence to some of these activities. So we will continue to support you, and you're more than welcome to stay on. We've got some announcements and such to go over. You're more than welcome to stay, but if you need to, I know, Zach, you've got a lot to do in the next few days. So thank you again. We very much appreciate the work you're doing and your being here today.
Thank you all
Thank
so
you, Beth.
much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be in touch with you, Beth, about the creatives thing. And yeah, I do have a haircut right now. I've been putting it off for like a month because I cannot find the time. So I'm going to have to go do that. But I really, really appreciate y'all and wish you a great weekend.
Bye-bye, Zach. Good. Okay. Well, let's continue.
Who should I pass the hosting thing back to? I can't leave without ending it, and I would not want to do that to y'all.
Host disable. Let me try and do that.
Should I send it back to you?
Yes.
Okay. Where's Richard? Oh, your climate reality. That's what was throwing me off. You don't have your regular name there. Okay.
No.
There we go.
Okay. Thanks, Zach. Yeah. Don't.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, and I would love to receive the recording. Would be happy to share
I'll
this with
send
folks.
you the link.
Cool. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Okay, lots of other business. We still have a little bit of time left. Thank you for hanging in there. Alex had to drop off due to an emergency where she's working. So Simon and I will cover a couple of her topics. The first topic is the Power Up. You've probably received many emails over the last few weeks about the next climate reality training, Power Up from Acts to Action. It's virtual for about 2 weeks, mostly on demand. And there's only 2 mandatory sessions, I think, at night, maybe a Tuesday and Thursday. But other than that, it's on demand when you can get to it. So I'm also as busy as heck, but I'll see if I can fit it in. It's going to be really focused on the Inflation Reduction Act, which I think is extremely important for us to understand and to be able to communicate to our fellow activists, because it's where we'll actually be able to help people and businesses and communities financially with some very practical solutions. So the registration closes, I think, Monday. So if you're at all wavering and interested, you have a day or two to sign up. Any questions about that before I hand it over to Simon to talk about the strategic plan? Okay, good. Simon.
Thank you, Richard. One comment on that training I wanted to add in real quick. If you are trained or not trained, either one is a great opportunity. Very relevant for those of us that are already trained, and it's an opportunity to get the green ring if you've not been trained yet. All right, so we've been working on the strategic plan for the last several months, we being the executive committee. we have the draft finished. It is, I'll drop the link here in the chat. And it is ready for feedback from the membership. If anybody has any comments, please get them back to us. Let's see, what was the date that we put on there? We didn't have one this week because we need to get it into to national. So if anybody has anything else to add to it, any comments, anything, just please reach out to us after reviewing the document. If you're on the executive committee, this is what we've already been working on. So there's nothing new in there at this point. And yeah, we would love to hear any feedback from the group. Anybody have any questions or anything on that?
Simon, were you going to put that in the chat?
Yes. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I had a direct message open, so I sent it to only one person. There you go.
Thank
Now it's
you.
gone to everyone. And it's just like an outline in the summary of what we plan to do for the coming year in each of the areas that we operate within.
Good. Thank you, Simon. Okay, so I'm going to talk just for a couple of minutes about the Willow Project. This has been the big news in the last week and a tremendous disappointment to us environmental activists. Very disappointed in Joe Biden giving the okay to let this move on. But I put a URL, another Sierra Club link, a URL that talks about the Willow Project, the Willow Oil Project. So let me just read you a couple of sections from that. Indigenous people and environmental groups on Monday swiftly slammed the Biden administration's approval of the controversial Willow Oil drilling project along Alaska's North Slope. They say that ConocoPhillips' plan, which would be the largest oil development on federal land in U.S. history, conflicts with the president's promise that no new oil and gas drilling would happen on public lands under his leadership. And also, the new project is expected to release more than 260 million tons of carbon dioxide over its 3-decade lifespan, add nearly 500 acres of gravel fill and hundreds of miles in roads and pipelines to one of the country's wildest areas. So this is truly a tragic sort of development. The story is not over yet. A number of environmental organizations have filed suit against this project. And if you follow the link I put in chat, there is a way to send President Biden your personal message about how you feel on that. You'll see the full article from the Sierra Club magazine, but in the middle of it, you'll see a take action button. And I encourage you to do that. We do need to move on. But before I move on, Chip, did you want to say anything else about the Willow Project?
No, I think that you've handled it quite well. It is a tragedy. The litigation is a hope. I think it was, it came about because of the politics, probably going back to, discussions with Manchin. And, as we all know, there was a compromise in the Inflation Reduction Act that allowed for, some continued exploration, but it's absolutely the wrong path. And it's heartbreaking, disappointing, a betrayal. Kamala Harris was asked about it on Colbert the other night, and her response was so horrifically inadequate that it just, I think it destroys confidence on a lot of fronts. And it changes the political calculation I think a lot of us need to make in terms of what we do to support good environmental governance and continued leadership. But yes, definitely take action. That Sierra Club button is a very user-friendly way to do so. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Chip. Okay, we're going to move on. Lots of other stuff going on. We do, of course, have a booth at Oak Cliff Earth Day on April 16th. And I do think we have had adequate people sign up for it. I had a sign up form. I think I have enough people signed up if everybody comes who said they would. But even if you're not signed up, I would encourage you to attend Oak Cliff Earth Day. It's by a lovely park in Oak Cliff, and there's lots of interesting vendors there to interact with, and you can help us spread the word. We'll have a pretty colorful booth with lots of energy that day. So you can Google that, and I'm sure we'll be sending lots more information about that before April 16th actually comes rolling about. The next thing is EarthX. We have a booth at EarthX for 3 days. That's April 21st to 23rd. And several of you have signed up for booth shifts. I will put a link in the chat if you're interested. We still do need some help there. It's a pretty big commitment. Let's see if I can get that in the chat. That's the form to volunteer for some booth shifts. Let's see, should have had this out, but I think there's a couple of days. I think Friday and Saturday morning in particular, that we actually at this point, Friday afternoon and Sunday morning are the least covered. And I'm sorry, Friday morning and Sunday morning are the least covered days and times. We could also use help on Sunday afternoon. So please consider that. Okay, I just wanted to mention we did have a best day and time to meet survey. And 12 to 15 people maybe did fill it out. And Saturday morning at 10 a.m. did still come in as the high vote getter. Nothing really was convincing otherwise. So this still does seem to be the best time, despite challenges some people have with the time. So I wanted to relay the results of that survey. And the last thing I had was there will be no meeting in April. We've got a lot going on in April, at least Oak Cliff Earth Day and EarthX. So please participate. Even if you can't come to the booth and help staff it, please participate. EarthX is a huge activity at Fair Park, and there'll be movies and music and all sorts of things. So if you can't staff the booth, please do try and attend those two activities. Good. Well, I'm done talking. I will pass it over to Jeffrey to close us out with a poem.
Thank you, Richard. And this is a poem from a book of poetry by Kai Sedenberg called Love Poems from the Earth. And it's called The Earth on Life Support. These days, being with the earth is like being at the bedside of a beloved grandmother who is critically ill. We love her so much. We hate to see her pain. We can't bear the thought of losing her. We desperately want to help. Yet what we're able to do feels completely inadequate. It's almost too much to bear. It's no wonder that sometimes we have to turn away. Turn away if you must. Take breaks when you need to. Find the strength to keep going and then return to her side. Let her know you're there. Tell her how much you love her. Hold her hand, tell her stories, sing her songs. Do what you can to ease her suffering, to bring her joy, and help her get the best care available. Even if all this will never seem like enough, even if she doesn't visibly respond, she can hear you. She can feel your love. Now, more than ever, the earth needs you. Thank you.
Very nice, Jeffrey. Thank you. Okay, well, that's it for our meeting today. I think we can officially adjourn. No meeting in April. We will have a speaker in May, and you'll be getting emails and hearing lots more from us. So everybody take care. Have a wonderful weekend. Hope to see you at Oak Cliff and Fair Park.